for 15,000 people playing this when one person got the car, and what was really getting the 14,999 people excited, not just the person.
Obviously you have to have something that's very, very simple. It has to solve a really clear product. And so one of the things that we're looking at is, is it SEO friendly? So can someone, when they search for it, will they find the product, right? And so if it isn't, as BJ likes to say, if it isn't crunchy, it's never going to surface through the SEO, So if you're trying to figure out what the meaning of life is, and you do that search in Google, you're not going to get a lot of help. It's going to be a mishmash of results.
Get Monty Python movies.
You get 42 or something.
Yeah. On the other hand, if you say, my life goal right now is to, run a marathon, then you're going to get something really super crunchy to help you on that goal. All right? So there's that distinction.
So crunchy is like a word for practical or easy to implement, maybe?
No, it's something very specific.
Right.
It's very specific. So, like when healthcare companies come to our lab and say, we want to help Americans be more healthy, because that's not crunchy. They'll say, like, if you see, on the other hand, I'm a corporation and I want my employees who are male, who are between 20 and 25, to walk 30 minutes a day, that's crunchy. Because you can actually design for that behavior. You know who the target is. They're 20 to 25-year-old males. They live in Atlanta. They work at the store. And you're going to say, how can I design it so they walk 30 more minutes a day? You can engineer that. Okay, so that's the sort of thing that we like in behavior design. If it gets too vague, then, just as you're doing a product, you're trying to do it for everyone. And people go, well, I'm not sure what to do with this. What is it for? Right? And typically when people go search for a solution, it's because they have a very particular problem. And so if you look at it through the metaphor of, it's really interesting because we're all being conditioned to sort and organize the world to a great extent by our experience in using search for the last 15 years. Right? So how effective are we in search? When we get more specific, when we can get very, very crisp about the language, then we're going to get a better result, right? And so when you think about your product and service, you want to do that. You want to make it very specific. And
isn't that a balance, though? Because you want something that's very crunchy for you to get yourself started.
Right.
But then you need the idea. You don't want just 1,000 users. You don't necessarily only want to end up talking to those 20 to 25-year-olds. You want something that's going to blow out. We all want the big hit, right?
Right. But see, what happens is that your first 1,000 users, so like Mint, personally, the people personally emailed every single person who signed up, the first 1,000 users. With Quora, for the first 100 people who answered questions, the employees emailed them and thanked them and complimented them about their answer. So the status and access, so that when a core human behavior thing, we all want to be seen, heard, and understood. Okay, so if you can satisfy that core need of, I want to be seen, heard, and understood. So the core employees are saying like, oh, Chris just wrote this fabulous post. Let me send a quick email. Chris, I just read that. That was a great insight about X, Y, and Z. Cheers, margarita. It's like, wow, someone actually heard me. That is very powerful. Yes?
Hi, I want to try to pull this in an innovation direction more explicitly. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Howard Lieberman. I'm the founder of the Innovation Institute. And before that, I want to first acknowledge Consuelo because this whole program was her idea.
Yay,
So
Consuelo!
she got here a little bit after it got started, but she dreamed this up and pitched it to us, and that's why it's happening. So here's the blasphemous assertion coupled with the challenge.
Sure.
You've been talking a lot about engagement and expansion. Now, from an innovation perspective, innovation has nothing to do with quantity. It has to do with quality. So we're not necessarily concerned with engaging the whole universe. We're actually concerned more with transformation. So here's the challenge for all of you. Since you're talking about engagement, and most content delivery and most education is presuming intellectual relevancy, but not emotional relevancy. And games have emotional relevancy. But whether it's gamification or serious gaming or whatever this panel's about, it's really about the intersection of intellectual engagement and emotional engagement, presumably for the purpose of development and evolution to get you up that path toward the master and visionary. So a challenge I'd like to throw at you is, besides talking about how to be viral and engaging, how do we do something that intersects with emotional relevancy and intellectual relevancy and takes advantage of the fact that you have a power that nobody ever had before? because conventional education wasn't necessarily that emotionally relevant, but the best teachers, the best faculty members were, sure, very emotionally relevant, and sometimes they knew less than the people who could quote the whole encyclopedia, but there was such a drag that everybody got up and left the room. You've got, so the challenge I'd like to give you, since you've got both emotional relevancy and intellectual relevancy, what are you going to do with it to change the world? Because without increasing the innovation and using this to drive it, the world's still going to fall apart. And this is an innovation institute. The reason we're getting together to have these conversations is to have a provocative dialogue about innovation. We're an innovation advocacy organization. We want to support innovation, so that's the challenge.
Okay.
I'll
Go for it.
I'll be the sacrificial lamb. I'm I'm a reformed game developer, and I'm now see myself as an educator, and the biggest thing for me is really, in terms of innovation, is really finding new ways to educate, because the education system obviously is really broken. It's designed to support an industrial revolutionary type of society, and we're no longer that anymore. So we need to kind of revamp that. So tying that back into gamification, I'd say to address some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of virality and how to spread the word and everything. It's part of it is really to find new ways to engender user creation. We're so used to consuming, and we're all consumers. We're born to be consumers. We're taught to be consumers. I find that it's so difficult to teach, especially these days, where your audience is used to just getting spoon-fed, right? So it's like I have to regurgitate this knowledge and shove it into your mouth, and you swallow it up and you take it for fact. So what I'm trying to do is to take a lot of the lessons I've learned in professional game development and say, well, okay, how do we get the audience to generate their own content using the game as a starting point, as a model, as a tutorial, as a way of learning how things work, and then saying, go off, share with others, and that's another component. It's sharing, right? I think we forget that when we talk about social games, it's like, well, they're not really social until you get to the point where you're sharing. When you're at the office, by the water cooler, are you talking about the game in a way where you're really sharing that experience with another person in a face-to-face dialogue, or even over chat, or through Skype or whatever, or a phone call. I always tell my students, it's like, well, there's a game called Battlefield, 1942 Battlefield series. First-person shooter, blah, 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 your typical first-person shooter. But it's all about lots of people playing with each other. And one of the things that, the early things that we latched onto in design for kind of AAA titles was the Battlefield moment. And what that states is that, okay, well, in Battlefield, you can do all sorts of crazy things like, strap, explosives onto a car, drive the car over a ramp, fly it into somebody's base, jump out of the car, hit the detonator, blow the base up, and then survive the day. Now that's cool. Now, that's a Battlefield moment. That's something I would share with my friends. I'd post on my blog. I just brag about it all the time. So we got elements of prestige. We got elements of sharing. We got user-generated content. All those things kind of come into play. And so we're able to kind of leverage that kind of sharing, that kind of user-generated content in products that aren't necessarily for entertainment purposes. I think that's where some of the innovations can come.
I want to restate the thing you said in that pile that was profoundly important, because you followed it up and dove into sharing. Before that, you said essentially you wanted to change consumers into creators.
Yeah.
And that is profoundly important, because if you didn't create anything, then what on earth are you sharing?
Right. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to do a follow-up to Albert. I worked at Linden Lab on Second Life for many years, and Second Life was one of those really successful experiments in what happens when we fully empower users to create their own 3D experiences. And we worked with the military, all the top institutions in the country, the top businesses. for a game that was originally designed for consumers. And the ability to create just has this unbelievable engagement. Our average user spent 40 hours a month in the game. But I think the challenge with user-created content is a lot of it's junk. So we had that with the internet when it first came out. We had that with
The harnessing of groups to create stuff.
Yes.
So it's going from single player to multiplayer, if you will. Harnessing groups to do things where you need a specialized set of different skills. And you're seeing an enormous explosion of crowdsource this, crowdsource that, and the distributed labor platforms where you're seeing technology platforms enabling people to come together to do complex projects. Is anyone familiar with what NASA is doing on software development in this line? I mean, it's mind-blowing. Look up Jason Cruzan and Harim Kassani of Harvard Business School are collaborating on a project where they're going to build the next software for the next shuttle for life support systems, which is critically important. We want the astronauts to stay alive. It is a $110 million budget software program. They have done a pilot at a $10 million budget level on a small piece of that, where they break it down into sub-segments that are given out as problems to solve to a worldwide global community of high-end hacker programmers who want to show off their skill with the algorithm or the architecture, and slam it down as a competition, which is a game-like game mechanic right there. And they're getting it done for 1/10 the cost, higher quality, and then crowdsourced beta testing. So they're in the midst right now of a year-long project to try and do that. So that to me is harnessing crowd-based innovation, not the wisdom of crowds voting for cat videos, but using it on some hardcore. Not that there's anything wrong with cat videos.
I tend to have a big problem because just when and it's just a quick aside, like when people use sheeple or other terms like that undermine an audience value, like it twigs me. I was just so yeah, but I think you're absolutely right.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, I just think that the power of the cat video is exactly what you know what I mean. Like it may not be towards an end that gives us the power, but it's a great, powerful metaphor.
Yeah.
So I'm not disagreeing with you. I just, in fact, I emphatically agree.
When you talk about innovation, what's so beautiful is you're seeing these markets for attention and talent that are becoming very specialized and able to draw out. Sometimes you need 3 geniuses from Bulgaria who can write this kind of algorithm. Sometimes you need the many to solve the problem, and learning how to structure these problems. They're finding that's the tricky part. It's the game design aspect of how do I structure the problem to attract and elicit the engagement. And so this whole issue of engagement, I get really interested when it brings on the social scale. And you start to think about the stats that say for a mild level of effort or personal effort and pain, about 50% of humans will behave in an altruistic way. They will share, cooperate, and make that small effort. And about 25%, no matter what you do to them, they're going to go for the gain and the personal interest. But that's really interesting, that half the population naturally is happily wanting to behave in an altruistic, pro-social way, and how you can design systems that pull on that and mitigate the effect of the self-centered or harness it for where that's more appropriate. So there's all these social design issues that we're starting to think about, and I think that's where a lot of innovation will come from.
I just want to jump on the crowdsourcing, because that is a source of kind of what's going on in game design or these experience designs. I was playing part of the Galaxy Zoo family the other day, and I was just sitting there having my lunch and thought, I'll try and find some exoplanets, because what else am I going to do right now? And it seemed like something I would do, and I start using this thing, and it's really simple. It almost seems too simple. We just want you to look at these stars. No one else is really looking at them, and kind of see if you see this thing. I see that there. Is it kind of flat? Is it like this? And they're basically giving you a real piece of something that a telescope has looked at, and having you match it with something else, and you match it, and what you don't realize until you look into it is that there's 50,000 pieces of these things that scientists don't have time to look at, but they're giving it to multiple people.
Yeah.
So they're not getting BS answers; they're getting overlaps in the answers, but the way that their core loop that's in there is so tight that you find yourself doing it over and over again. And long after I'm done with my sandwich and my soda, I'm still sitting there finding exoplanets. And now I've gone on to Kenya, and I'm finding.
And he's going down that path.
And
training
now
himself as an exogeologist.
Right, and now I'm finding packs of hyenas on the tundra, or I'm underwater and I'm trying to find these the different tools. But then the real aha moment for me was a couple days later when I got an email back from this company saying, oh, by the way, we've just published a white paper and it's going to be in such and such, science magazine, and these 17 people who helped us find these new exoplanets are going to be named in there. And you talk about the status that comes from that, of like, you're putting like real people that just went onto a website and found these exoplanets and they're getting in Science magazine. And that's real. They're not doing it for some sort of like PR hit. These people actually did science. And bringing real people into the forefront of what's happening, that's the essence of crowdsourcing. But like you said, you have to engineer the experience that's going to work for the people who are going to go out there and use it. That's where the real innovation is happening.
The protein folding stuff works.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
folding is amazing.
So-
It's amazing.
All right. Well, let's now. Chris may make a face, but because I tend like there's a lot of there is some radical thought on innovation here, right? But it's about moving gaming. Here's the problem that I see a lot, right? We have a 1,000-year-old system called capitalism that has been totally gamified and isn't fundamentally rich enough to categorize a lot of these systems. And the reason that I say that is like I was doing a job where I was talking to somebody about doing poker, and they were and they've been doing worldwide poker and poker innovation, right? And the way that this game system works for them, the way that they're doing poker is
Poker innovation.
is that they have a massive number, they have a currency system that can convert so they want people to come and sit at the table and be able to play each other anywhere in the world, right? So what they can do is they have an engine that can convert any currency in real time into any other currency in real time into their in-game currency. And they were like, heck, while we're doing that, we might as well keep track of the cards, the chips, the prizes, and everything else the same way. And so what they built is a massive meta-currency interaction system that they built a small poker game on top of. And that's making them, right? And because they have to deal with all the legal stuff and all the other stuff, and the engine can handle that gracefully and effortlessly because it's worth their while to do it. Right? So really, on a deeper level, what we're talking about here is all these big transactional systems. Look at Facebook, right? Facebook's problem is that their customers aren't their audience, and so they have to convert. What's holding them back from doing what they want, whether it's good or bad, is the fact that they have to convert that at some point into profit. So, we have a lot of great ideas and we have a lot of great crowdsourcing, but there's a limitation that comes, and I'm not against the need for profit. We all want money, we all want to eat, we all want to succeed. It's also a great way to show how successful your ideas were. But it has its strong limits that actually fight against the fact that gamification is great at taking currency and great at taking economy and making that fluid. And my first tool to look at somebody's project beyond the fundamentals of their idea is like, how can I break this down into what is your currency and what is your economy? And I'm sure, Chris, you do the same thing, right? Similar stuff. So anyway, that's a little bit of a rant, but it definitely is. Innovation comes from looking at those systems and saying, how can we tweak that?
On a similar point, can you guys talk a little bit about alignment of motivations? I think that Facebook is an obvious example of misalignment of motivations. But can you talk about that, about how that affects the possibilities for gamification?
Ponder that for a moment. In our lab, we don't look at motivation too heavily because people who are highly motivated will do what they want to do anyway. And so when you're designing behavior systems, you're looking to move people to take action who aren't highly motivated. But again, the thing is, how do you take the friction out of it and make it so bloody easy to do that they do it without thinking?
But for example, over time,
Mm-hmm.
someone's motivation, if they first get in and they start playing, then both their skill level is going to increase and also presumably their motivation is going to increase. And so you want to move them up the curve in the sense of the fog curve, right?
No, you don't want to rely on increased motivation. What you want to do is habituate the behavior. So you don't get increased motivation to go to Starbucks every day. You just do it out of ritual. And so that's where you get the sustainability.
I guess I'm thinking more in terms of like let's just say World of Warcraft.
Mm-hmm.
When you first get into World of Warcraft, it's fairly simplistic. As you get further on, it becomes much more complex, much more difficult but also other things of motivation, such as a guild system and things like that, are added in that give you additional reasons to be more interested. Because if it didn't,
But that's
if
not,
it didn't
but-
increase, then if it
But
didn't increase
I would-
complexity,
but
you get
motivation,
bored.
motivation isn't the right term. It's adding novelty and discovery.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
I would disagree with the
And social
increase in
mechanics.
Yeah.
difficulty, because the whole kind of design between the system of the grind is that if you're a first level fighter and you're fighting against a little wimpy rat, it's going to take you 7 whacks to kill it. If you were 40th level paladin and you're going against this red dragon, it's going to take you 7 whacks to kill it. And now they may have
Yeah.
scaled it up to where that's the whole system of the grind. Is
So
that
if all you're doing is grinding, then you haven't played World of Warcraft.
right? No, I understand that, but that's where the core
social
loop. That's what the core loop of the game is.
For the
They-
grind part.
Right.
I would argue that the later end state is much more about the social and the cooperative and the sandbox aspects of the game.
That's a good point.
To Stephanie's earlier point about segmenting the different types of
Right.
users with different motivations as
Right.
well, there's a very different sets of games depending on what part of the game attracts you.
Right, so there are
Right.
different needs. So there games are referred to, the narratives are referred to as elder games. Because people have been playing it so long, so you get rid of all the newbie stuff, you know, and people go and they go, I'm a newbie, I don't get it at all. And they go, yeah, because this game isn't designed for you.
Yeah.
It's designed for someone who's an expert who wants to move into a master. Dave,
Yeah, perfect. I was just talking to Craig Disrens, who runs Village Harvest. They're the people who, if you've got a bunch of fruit in your tree and you're old and you don't know how to like get it out, they'll send somebody and take that fruit and go deliver it to the harvest bank, food bank. And I was just today talking about their unconference they're going to be putting on, and I was trying to figure out how we can get more volunteers. So they're actually doing quite well, but here's the thing, getting back to your point specifically. He actually doesn't want to motivate them any more than they already are. And here's the reason why, is because he feels there's a natural harmony to the type of behavior that will be sustainable.
Yeah.
And so he feels that harmony is around having it become a lot more than just simply doing the good of harvesting the fruit and making it more of a social activity that they can do over and over again as a habit. So that absolutely backs up exactly what you just said a moment ago.
thank you.
Yeah.
I did not pay him to say that.
I didn't even know it was an conversation today. So.
I feel like gamification is directly contrary in many cases to innovation. And if you look at, because like the whole idea, we just put in a bunch of gamification to our game, is to get the player to do a specific thing. I want you to look at the next single slide of this. It's more of like Mechanical Turk in that case. But what you want to do is like the most interesting things that happen in games is when the players find exploits. You gave a perfect example of that go beyond the rule to do something really innovative. And I wonder, this isn't an answer. This is like, I wonder, right, at that point about how you use gamification or maybe beyond gamification to get groups of people. Like, the reason why clans work is because it's very crunchy, right? They're in a very specific problem space trying to solve things. But how you get these people to collaborate in a way that goes beyond to really innovate.
So I think that one of the opportunities is this remixing, right? So you want to sample ideas. So what's really interesting about the games, and Byron Reeves does quite a bit of work on this at Stanford, and he has a book about and talks about why games are great and why work sucks, right? And then he studies World of Warcraft very deeply. And so one of the interesting things is there's this experiment that's going on in the wild. This whole demographic, this cohort of people who have learned how to collaborate, cooperate, and innovate together, and how to solve problems in this constrained artificial world, right? And they've done that, and then you could say, well, can we do this in this other environment? Because they all have this shared reference, right? You say, oh, what if we do this? And they go, oh, yeah, let's do that. And so then the question is, what is the crossover potential of innovation, of taking these concepts that have been done in this game environment and saying, well, what if we did it in a corporate environment? What if we did it in disaster relief? Because we're hey, let's put together a guild, but this is a guild for this earthquake. Right? And so we come together, and that's where the innovation happens, because you're taking an idea in one domain, and then you're remixing it.
Well, you're
another.
seeing that happen already. I mean,
Right.
IBM is spending bazillions on social collaboration software. to label people, help them find tasks to work on, find projects to follow. I mean, there are lots of the big companies are working on this. They're not calling it gamification, because I think that's been tagged with leaderboards and badges, which I think we all, can we say, we all hate?
We're not talking about that
Yeah.
today.
Not that
Yeah.
those don't have power, but it's been well explored. And
They're
you can go-
powerful,
yeah,
but
you
yeah,
can be
it's-
well explored and you can get it in there and it has limits, right?
That's
Clear
the
limits.
shallow waters of
Yes.
some really cool things that are out there when you start to take some of these metaphors from the MMOs about communication channels. I mean, it's not just a tweet stream, but it's a functional, here's what the engineers in our company are thinking about, here's what the marketing people are thinking about, here's about the people who want new projects. What if that, like you have the different chat lines in a game, why don't we have that kind of communication within companies? And there are companies that are experimenting with that. So they're taking these direct analogs and trying them out.
Can I throw in one thing though, which
Sure.
is, because I'm a game guy and at the end of the day, and clearly managed conflict is good, right? Like the thing about these systems that you want to be talking about is, you own the conflict. You define that conflict. You define what, like talking about clans, right? It's not just interesting because it's a crunchy problem. It's interesting because you get to kick the other guy's butt, right? And if you set up win conditions, if you want to motivate people in the classic sense that you're talking about, if you set up a win condition and you give them goals, and you soften the lose conditions, and boy, we're pretty good at that, I'd say, at this point in terms of what we've done. If you look at the social game model of the last 5 years, we can both set up conflicts, and we can set them up in a way that doesn't disempower somebody or make them feel like a loser if they don't get what they want. So I think looking at where you're placing those conflicts and those rewards again is a very powerful way to use this to solve problems and to solve innovation, right? There's only one winner of the X Prize, but there's a lot of innovation and power that came out of those meetings, and it didn't necessarily mean that no other good technology was created.
Is there more examples too of what you're describing? I mean, I want to hear more about what's happening at IBM or whatever. We had some real world examples of corporate, as corporate as you can get where gamification has made an impact.
I can maybe talk a little bit. I can't disclose everything because our corporate partner would probably, I'd be in jail. So we've been working with Ericsson. Some of our students have been working with Ericsson to do a visualization for kind of a networked neighborhood watch, and that's all I can really say. Mm-hmm. So the surveillance camera will be tied to police, tied to fire response, tied to the hospitals, tied to neighborhood watch, tied to your cell phone. All those things are interconnected. So that was kind of, the germs of that was kind of in the vein of how we approached it was in the vein of a quest or a dungeon instance. So it's like, well, how do we approach that? So, okay, who do we need? Let's say I need a healer, a warrior, a mage, and a thief. Okay, so what are the equivalents? So let's say an engineer, a designer, an artist, and an audio person maybe.
MBA was the last one.
He's the bard. He's the bard.
He's the
bard. So essentially you have a party, right? A party of people who are relatively good in their professions. They have their specific specializations and weaknesses, and they complement each other. And so then you get this party, and you give them a problem, and they should be able to solve most any problem, all right? Because one or the other will kind of come up with some solution or some sort of way to approach a problem, and then everybody else will kind of iterate on that, and the group will kind of group think the solution out.
It seems like there's almost like two levels of innovation, though, right? There's one level of innovation that is that group that assembles and goes and solves a problem in a cooperative way and innovates in that solution. But another level of innovation that's maybe more interesting is the people who put together the system that makes that possible. And that's an innovation that's really interesting.
And I think what's important about right now is we've now set up the technologies and the social platforms where that kind of emergent behavior can come, where people will build the first version of a system that really works, and then that will propagate out.
So innovation is a very squishy term because everyone has a different definition of it. But one of the things that is apparent is this new form of social and organizational behavior innovation. Because again, we've taken the friction out of organizing, we've taken the friction out of cooperating, we've taken the friction out of collaborating, because a lot of it is just work. So back in the day when people typed memos, I mean the labor of typing that memo and getting it distributed. And so, when you think of the overhead of just coordinating people, back when we were in paper-based systems, it was just so arduous that our ability to do things was limited. I mean, we couldn't get super ambitious just because the overhead cost was so high. But now, because of these social technologies, which are really cooperation and collaboration technologies, it takes all the effort out of it, right? So one of the interesting things about the Arab Spring and the way people like, well, go and use Facebook, was that they tested through Facebook events whether or not it was worth having a protest. Okay, so from a collaboration and coordination standpoint, you're saying, okay, so if 5,000 people RSVP that they're going to show up on this day, then it's a go. But if they don't, we're not going to do it. Now imagine pre-Facebook trying to determine if it's safe and if it's viable to have a critical mass of people to protest, to do a political protest, and the communication in their end. It would have been very, very hard. So what's interesting to me is that all of a sudden, once you take all the work out of this stuff, then what is going to be the social innovation that's going to occur in terms of how people come together to do new things? And we can't imagine it yet. I mean, I'll tell people, imagine what life was like in 2006. When you went out to dinner, you actually talked to the person you were having dinner instead of going like this.
Instead of talking to your computer.
Right? And so there's been big shifts at scale in terms of how we interact with people because we have mediated devices.
Well, I think you're worried about the fall of capitalism and the profit motive a little bit.
I'm not worried about it,
happening.
but I'm interested in it.
So
His bank account is interesting.
I'm looking, this is going into wild speculation territory, I don't have examples, but where I see things heading in the proto-examples that are out there is the corporation that we grew up in, or our fathers grew up in, was a top-down command and control structure. And there were attempts to make it more collaborative and get more feedback, blah, blah, blah. But it was never easy to make it collaborative and cooperative. It was never easy to make it self-organizing. I want to advance my career down there, so I need to do this kind of project next. Where is that project? Unless my boss releases me, I don't get to work on that. We are now in a position where companies have the capability. Now, I don't think Honeywell, say, not to knock Honeywell, it's a great company, but they're not going to be in the vanguard of having internal markets for engineers to go where they want to go. But I think we now have the mechanisms to allow that. So what happens to a corporation when its only function, stripped down to bare essentials, is setting a brand, a strategy, and then setting up project problems that people flock to either inside the company or with these outsourced platforms? And then what does capitalism really mean? I think we all become more of an Adam Smith Yeoman independent competing entity instead of these giant blocks of power. Then the world really gets turned upside down. You can go crazy.
It's funny because every time you say it, I'm just like, oh, it's already happened. It
is already. It's
right,
happening.
Because the thing is, I mean, my friend Douglas Rushkoff wrote a book called Life Inc., right? And he was talking about this idea that the thing is that most of the major corporations that we think of these days don't make anything more. They're holding companies for companies that make things, right? They're financial entities only that move money around.
Well, it's
right?
the
And that's
Stevenson
fundamentally what
quote.
you're talking
The
about.
future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Right. And then so you're seeing top down with the big money going that way, and you're seeing bottom up with small, like all this stuff that's happening now with the maker stuff and all the 3D printing stuff,
labs.
the hacker labs, right? Where it's like I need what you have, you need what I have, and then everybody comes together. I was just talking to Maxwell Bogue, who did the 3Doodler, right? And he built Max is.
I'm getting one.
Yeah, he's a great. I mean, I'm doing some interviews, and it's the best one I did, right? Because what I realized is that his skill that he really brings is the fact that he spent time in Hong Kong, and that he knows how to turn a device and a concept to mass manufacturing, and that's a valuable skill, right? And finding people who can filter those things where they need to go without having to build your company around that can be really powerful. So.
If I can ask
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can change tacks a little bit and ask about real-world examples again. I'm in the health games field specifically, and I'm curious if you've seen persuasive games specifically tackle problems of changing health behaviors, or if you've seen any successful examples of that.
I can give an example. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to bring an example that I worked on just a little bit about 10 years ago. If you've heard of Hope Lab, which is in,
I
in
worked there.
town here. Oh, awesome! and so you know the
You're talking about, but the other thing that games can do really well is like there's this thing I call the logic of smoking, right? Like, which is smoking's great in the moment, but you don't see the long-term value. And games can hyper accelerate that experience so that people can understand that, like, what 1,000, it's like, well, that I can smoke 1,000 cigarettes in one sitting with my character and watch him die, right? Like, it's like
that's the Sims moment, right?
Yeah. Games are really, really good at that, and you should, looking at what you're doing, like to let people understand that there's our brains are not good at understanding long-term consequences, and so one thing a game designer will often do is hyper accelerate those so the players can understand the value chain, right? And I think for stuff like health, I think that's super important because people don't understand what they're doing, or like, why do I need to take these pills every day? What would happen, like what you're talking about? And there's so many great examples, so many games that do that really well.
In Grand Theft Auto.
Jeremy Valenson, virtual life avatars in the future or something.
Okay.
Right, that I've started pitching to people that gets them very upset, which is the post-scientific model, right, where you never have to have a hypothesis to know the result. And that's the world of games. Welcome to it. Right? We like when you're working on a product and you launch it, like, nobody cares why, they just want to see the numbers change. Right? And you can try, and you just try different things, and you never stop to figure out why it worked. For a lot of, like Zynga and these big companies, or anybody who's trying to do social at scale, like what they call they have this thing called the funnel, right? Which is, how do we get people in and why do they stay? And the whole second day thing that Chris was talking about. And you don't care why. It's like, try this, try that, and you just have your engineers doing the different things. You're like, we got our 1%. Okay, move on.
Right.
Just go from there and keep going. And there's some articles. I think it's called The Death of Science, or Beyond the Scientific
Wired
Method.
did a piece on this a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
It's the era of petabytes or something.
Yeah, you don't want to stop to
quantitative
hypothesize.
science.
You just want to keep doing it and seeing the results and seeing what gets better. I mean, it gets into some serious privacy issues when you talk about medical stuff, but if you can just crowdsource it and see who's getting better, why the computers can just keep doing it, and if you don't have to wait to understand why, you can keep.
It's computational science. I mean, so again, when we move the dial. Right.
Well, but success is
controversial.
directly proportional. The clarity of a vision is directly proportional to your success.
Unless you're
Wooga. If you don't know where you're going, you're probably not going to get there. And since Ella, who was asking the question, is one of these people who has those hypotheses, who's curing diabetes, her hypotheses matter. She's changing the world with the clarity of her intentions.
Sure.
So when she poses an hypothesis and goes out and spends 10 years working on it, the world changes. And that's not going to happen by wandering around the universe.
Especially in healthcare, correlation is not
Dangerous, right? So you have to decide that for yourself, right?
Right.
But the truth is, like Wooga, which I was just bringing up in as a counter example to what you're saying, all they said, their whole logic that got them on the map was saying, we just have to get the game to be 1% better a month at getting the audience to, getting the audience engagement. And we never have to understand why, because at the end of the year we have a 10% improvement.
But that's not like curing diabetes. Who cares if you get
But if
10% more people playing a game? I want to fix the world.
But if I can just keep trying different models and know that, and then run experiments serially across large numbers of audience, I don't have to understand why that molecule was better. I mean, obviously you're going to poison people. There's other problems, but you understand what I'm saying, right? As long as you're moving in the right direction towards the solution that you want, that model does have some utility.
But is the right direction extending that diabetes patient's life by another 2 weeks in aggregate across everyone? Or is it curing the damn disease once and for all?
Right. I'm just a simple game designer.
And
so I'm not going to try to answer that question to your point.
I think the point is that the Zynga style incrementalism is really great if you want to increase by a few points your capture rate of people so you can advertise them or whatever.
Right.
But if what you're trying to do is actually find that outlier, find that thing that is not sitting in the midst of the bell curve, but that big outlier that's really going to actually change things, you're not going to find that this incremental little approach.
So to be sure, gamification, I think we've just eased into a different panel conversation.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
say that could swell into Howard. You ought to have a panel on big data.
Yeah.
Because we've just kind of segued into that, which is separate. It's linked to behavioral stuff, but it's not the same. And there's a very rich conversation to be had around the potential of big data, the perils, the ethics, privacy issues. We're in the midst of this where everyone's going like, wow, we have so much data, we could start to do predictive stuff, anticipatory stuff. But there are a lot of constraints and a lot of issues that are going to get in the way of that vision being realized in a way that we want. And so there's an opportunity to have some very important and deep conversations around the future that we want to create in that topic, but that's not games. And Consuelo's signaling that we should be getting to the last question. You have been wanting to say something. Okay, yes.
Actually, I want to expand on what you just said.
Yes.
To answer your question, I think gamification helps to collect data. A lot of the times it's helping collect data without people knowing why. It's data scientists who actually analyze a lot of data and make decisions. So combining gamification and data scientists give you a lot more ability to come up with results versus just putting responsibility on the gaming industry and saying you're supposed to solve the issue. They're not solving the issue. They're not supposed to do it. Data scientists are highly paid individuals. So taking the data that they collect and giving it to data scientists and then giving it back to them to test the idea is a better solution rather than making them come up with the solutions and ideas.
Nice.
Great. One last comment, and then I think we're just about done.
So I had a question.
Yes.
I want an opinion from the panel. What is the potential improvement in innovation if game designers focus on designing games where the objective is to break every rule of the game?
Oh, even hacking?
That's like reality.
We do it.
Yeah.
Well, it's called exploits, and it's called people wanting to break a game. I mean, look at Diablo 3. I mean, somebody made a way to copy gold, virtual.
Yeah, true, but it seems like there's a set of outcomes and rules, et cetera, the designers are working toward, and the idea is to enforce those and have players play to those rules. But if you turn the table and say, I'm going to put rules together, and the only reason is to get people to break the rules.
There's one thing that game designers will use that I'm not sure if it's directly related to this is they'll use it actually as an engagement tool of place a rule inside somewhere that someone can break, but it was meant to be broken. They look in there and they go, oh, I figured it out. I'm cheating. I've kind of figured out how to cheat the system. Yeah, and it makes them lean forward and see if there's any other exploits that they can find. Whereas the game designer may have put that in there because they wanted to help people want to feel clever when they're doing something. And whether you're building a game where you're going after dragons and castles, or whether you're creating a game where you're trying to get people to jog more, if you can get them to lean forward and engage by feeling more clever, even if it's by they feel that they're exploiting it. So people will look at that as a positive thing.
But that's a role where you still intentionally have that as an outcome.
Well, there's rocket jumping in the old Doom game. There was this thing. There's a game called Tribes where there's this thing called skiing that was entirely an exploit.
They built a whole new game out of that.
They did. Well, they rebuilt Tribes around that, but it didn't. The problem was once it was on purpose, it wasn't as much fun as when it was by accident.
Right.
I mean. So that idea of exploiting and that idea of community, and EVE Online has a lot of. There's a lot. Encourage that, right? So there's a lot of communities, but it tends to be that the community. It works best, I think, when the community itself feels ownership over that and sort of takes that over.
Players against the dev gods.
Right.
The other thing that's related and very big is building your own levels and building your own.
Yeah, Minecraft.
The Rails versus the sandbox games.
I love
Okay,
Minecraft.
so all right, one last comment, and then I'm going to ask people tactical closing comments.
I feel like a good window to look at that question through might be educational, because when you talk about breaking systems and making
You can leave out the big data stuff.
Okay, so when we were talking about this, Howard said, I want to find out how games can be used to solve serious problems in the world. And when I thought about that, I said, okay, well, one is that when we work with, when I work with NGOs or we interact with governments or institutions and so on, one of the fatal flaws of their approach is that they're not crunchy enough. They don't know the problem that they're actually trying to solve. So whether you're designing a product, whether you're doing something in the civic space, something offline or whatever, figure out exactly what you want people to do. And there needs to be a verb in it. I want, Hispanic women in East San Jose to read a book a month. Something very, very specific. And if it's measurable, then you can start to design for it. Okay? So whatever you do, and so we're talking about meta, we're not talking about badges, we're not talking about labels. And then select the appropriate technology that will help trigger that. So, for Fitbit, that gets me to get my steps in, because now, for me, I'm motivated to beat myself. And it buzzes me in the morning and to wake up, and it's awesome. So that's the appropriate technology for me to incent me to be, to get physically fit. Define your core loop. What is it, the essence that you want people to do? And have it very, very tight. Understand the compulsion analysis, and that is really thinking about what do you want people to do in the minutes, hours, weeks, and months ahead. Right? You got them to do it once. How can you get them to do it again and again? And how can you make it interesting for them to come back and to continue to engage? Measure it. Are you having an impact? You should know within 3 days, 5 days, a week, a month, whether or not anyone's doing this. If they're not, stop what you're doing and try something else. And then continually test these engagement strategies. And this applies, to me, working with BJ the last 4 years is such an aha. Because we're like, wow, I can actually apply this to real world problems. This framework, this approach, this way of thinking actually gets me away from working with nonprofit organizations and say, what we want to do is a campaign where we're going to inform everyone, and we're going to write this brochure, or we're going to design this website, and therefore the world's going to be a better place. And I go, but you haven't actually moved people to change what they do. You actually haven't moved them to act in any way that moves the needle. All you've done is written a lot of marketing copy that nobody reads. So let's get away from that. If we could only inform everyone, they would then figure out the right thing to do.
Could we put this on our website as part of the summary of it? That's
Yes.
a really great slide.
Yeah.
So Adam, do you have those slides?
You've got the slides, so. Yes. And I think that if we start thinking of that